Hello, in this video I'm going to be showing you my entire workflow for modeling this simple lamp in Blender. To start, I'm going to find out more information about the lamp by using Google image search. If you drag and drop your reference image and go to products, you can find a product page that usually has a drawing, a model, or specifications. So now I know the overall size of the model that I'm going to be making. In a new Blender scene, I'm going to start with an empty one. A to select all, X to delete, Shift A to import an image as plain. Then I navigate into my file structure where I've saved my reference image. In solid shading mode, you can't see the texture applied to the mesh, but if you click the drop-down menu and hit texture, it'll now be visible. And it's always going to be visible in material preview and rendered modes as well. I'm going to render in material preview this time. I'm going to rotate this by pressing R to rotate, X for the X axis, 90 degrees, enter. 1 to go into front view, and then I'm going to position this approximately on the ground plane by pressing G and then Z. I'm going to model a box of this size. Shift A, Mesh, Cube. N brings up the item menu, and in the dimensions I can type that in, 5.9 inches by 15.3. And then similarly I'm going to place this approximately on the ground plane. GY to move the reference image behind it. And then I'm going to use the search bar to find shade wire to turn it into a wireframe. You can make it unselectable. You can lock it essentially by using the filter and toggling on selectable. Now there's a new icon where if you turn that off, you can no longer select it. That's very useful if you just want to have something as reference. 1 to go into front mode again, select my reference image. S to scale. I'm going to scale this so it approximately fits within the size of this box. And now I'm ready to model. The majority of this lamp is just a series of cylinders and then a circular tube that gets extruded around a 90-degree bend. So it's just simple cylinders, and then I'm going to use the spin command to model this, and then a hemisphere for the lampshade. Shift A, Mesh, add a new cylinder, S to scale down. Match the approximate height, looks to be about 1 inch tall. S, Shift Z to scale without scaling in the Z direction, so it scaled evenly. Again, I'm just going to do this from a different view so you can see what happens. Normally when you press S, it's going to scale all the dimensions, but if you hit S and then Shift Z, you can scale just in 2 dimensions. S, Shift Z. It looks to be approximately 5 inches. And then there's another cylinder that sticks out of there, in which this armature connects to. You could just go into edit mode, face select, select this face, I to inset, E to extrude to create something like that. But I have no idea what the dimension of this is because it's connected to the overall object. So I'm going to undo that. And then I'm going to add a new cylinder that is centered directly on the origin of this object. To do that, I'm going to move the 3D cursor. Shift S brings up the cursor menu. The bottom selection, cursor to selected, where the number 2 is going to place the 3D cursor directly on the object that I've selected. So now when I add a new cylinder, scale it down, it's going to be centered directly on this previous cylinder. S to scale down, I'm going to make it 0.5 inches. I'm just using clean, simple numbers. SZ to scale vertically. GZ and then Control to snap onto the vertex of this. To model this, I'm going to make a duplicate of this cylinder, Shift D, R to rotate 90 degrees, position this here with G, S to scale down to match. It looks like it's approximately 3/8 of an inch, so 0.375. Tab into edit mode, vertex selection mode. And if I box select, I'm actually only going to select half of these vertices, because these are invisible, they're hidden behind these vertexes in the front view. If you go to wireframe by pressing Shift Z, you can do the same box selection, and it will now select all of them. So 1 to go back into front mode, Shift Z to go back into solid shading mode, GX to position this here, and then I'm going to use the spin command to do this radius. The spin command works, you can bring it up by pressing Alt E to bring the extrude menu, And if you hover over spin, it says extrude selected vertices in a circle around the cursor in the indicated viewport. So if we go ahead and do that, the 3D cursor is placed right here. The spin command is going to do 360 degrees for a full circle by default. You can change that to 90 degrees and increase the steps if you want more geometry. But this is not exactly correct. I want it to be more accurate. So what I can do is, I know that this was an approximation, but this is not directly in line with this face. In order to do that, I can place the cursor about this selection by pressing Shift S, 2, tab back out into object mode, Shift A and add an empty object. The empty object is just going to help me align. So I know that this is the point, and this is the point where the radius begins and ends. So Shift S2 to place my cursor there. And now, when I spin this, Alt-E, spin, it's going to be spinning directly above that point. E to extrude vertically. And then it's just a repeat, so I can select this entire object, Shift Z to go into wireframe again. I like to use the command select linked all. Select link all, it works similar to select linked, which is just the L button. You hover over an object and press L. But in case you have multiple objects, if you select any part of an object and use select linked all, it will select the rest of that entire object. I use that one a lot. So select just a little bit, select linked all, Shift D to duplicate, Z to position it vertically, Control M brings up the mirror command, and I'm going to select Z as my mirror axis. Shift Z goes back into solid. GZ, I'm going to position this to align with the reference image. And now there is a gap between here that we need to fill. You can do that a couple different ways. If you select these faces and right click and find bridge faces, it will extrude connecting those. That's one way you can do it. You can also scale them to be the exact same Z. So SZ0 is going to collapse them into a single Z value, but there's going to be overlapping vertices there. So I've selected the vertex right there, but you can see as I move it, there's another vertex right there. So this is actually two separate objects. If you want to merge them, Alt-M brings up the merge command, and you can select by distance, and you can see I removed 32 vertices there, and they're no longer overlapping. And so I have a single vertex selected there. If I hit select linked all, which I have mapped to a shortcut to be Control Shift left click, you can see that a single vertex there shows this is that entire object. Tab back out into object mode, 1 to go front view, Shift C to go into material preview, to go into solid mode. Tab back into edit mode, Shift C to go wireframe, select these again, GX to position them here. Now I'm going to model a slightly larger tube there, Shift D to duplicate, right click to reset position, S to scale just a little bit larger, E to extrude, and then there's another tube that connects to this hemisphere for the lampshade. So I'm going to go into face selection, grab the smaller one, front view, Shift D, R 90 degrees to rotate it, E to extrude down. Select link all, and then GX to position that there, and then align the end of it right there. So when I add this hemisphere, I'm going to add a full sphere and then delete the bottom half, but I want it to be centered directly on this selection. So Shift S2, I've done that a few times now, we'll place the cursor centered about this selection. Shift A, add a mesh, UV sphere, S to scale, and I'm going to scale it to match the diameter of the reference image. GZ to position it vertically, tab into edit mode, face select, and I'm going to box select the bottom half. Again, since I'm in solid shading mode, you cannot select the invisible faces that are behind these ones. So if you go into shaded mode, Shift Z, and then box select, same thing, it's going to select the entire bottom half now. X brings up the delete menu, F to delete faces. The scale is not at 1, so we want to change that to be uniform at 1. Control A brings up the apply menu, S apply scale. The S is underlined, so if you were to hit S, it would automatically click that. So now we have a hemisphere that is very thin, that needs to have
a certain thickness.
You can do that a couple of ways. If you add a solidify modifier, you can choose the amount. So I would pick something like a 1/16 of an inch, 0.0625 inches, and you can choose which direction you want to extrude that in. Another way you can do that is just by tabbing into edit mode, A to select all faces, bring up the extrude menu with Alt E, and choose extrude faces along normals. And so you can, again, extrude outward, that's a positive amount, or extrude inward, that's a negative amount. I want to extrude negative here, so it's negative 0.0625, that's a 1/16 of an inch. But when I check the face orientation using the search bar, you can see that this hemisphere is now red. Red indicates a flipped normal. When you typically bring in an object, it's blue facing outward, red facing inward. So to correct this, you would tab into edit mode, A to select all faces, Shift N recalculates normals. So you can do that for the lampshade as well as the mirrored portion of this armature. A to select all, Shift N, recalculate everything's blue, and then you can turn the face orientation off. At this point, you can select all the objects. This is going to be my active object. You can tell it's more yellow than orange. Control J is going to join all of those objects together and maintain the origin of the active object. If you want to, you can add a light bulb. So Shift S2 is going to place the cursor at that origin point. Shift A, I'm going to add another UV sphere. 1 to go in the front view, S to scale down, tab to go into edit mode. And I'm just going to select the top view faces, pull them up, give it a light bulb shape, double click to select this edge loop, Control B to bevel, just to give it slightly rounded. And that can be my light bulb. Join it into one object again. You can turn this back on to selectable and delete the bounding box. And you can delete the reference image. If I want to add a ground plane, I can tab into edit mode, change the face selection, grab this bottom of the cylinder, Shift S2 places the 3D cursor there, and then I add a new plane. It's going to be placed directly in line with the bottom edge of that cylinder. To apply a simple material, you're going to bring up the shader editor, select your object, hit new. I'm going to make it some kind of brass metal. Brass metal is typically a yellow orange hue. Crank the metal up, decrease the roughness. All the edges are very hard right now, so what you can do is add a bevel modifier, which gives all those hard edges a slightly rounded over appearance. If you go into rendered view, right now there's currently no light, and my light bulb actually has brass material as well. If you go to material, add a new material slot, add a new material. I'm going to call this light. And in the shader editor, I am just going to delete this and add a emission shader. Control Shift left click will automatically connect the node to the material output. I'm going to tab back into edit mode, select one face of my light bulb. Control Shift left click is the shortcut that I have set for select linked all. And then I'm going to assign the light material. So now you can see that the light is glowing, but I want it to be so bright that I can see the light on the plane. What I did right there, sometimes the outline of the orange object is a little distracting. Sometimes the grids and the axes are also distracting. The shortcut to remove overlays is Alt-Shift-Z. So you can toggle that on and off very quickly. You can see right here, these are the overlays. So the same thing, Shift-Alt-Z to turn those on and off. So I think it's easier to do that when you want to increase the light and you want to see it without the orange outline. So the light has some emission, but there's no light actually on the light, you can just add a new light. GZ, bring it up, S to scale down. When I add a light, I usually unclick multiple importance. Multiple importance says use multiple importance sampling for the light, reduces noise for area lights and sharp glossy materials. The only reason I like to do that, I'm going to extrude up at this face. Press PS to separate into a new object. Add a new material. I'm going to make it a mirror, a highly reflective surface. Crank up the metal, crank down the roughness. So when this is checked, you can actually see the reflection of the light in the glossy material. I don't particularly like that when I set up scenes, so I usually turn that off, and now the light no longer shows up in the reflection. This light is pretty bright, so I'm going to turn it down a little bit. Remove this mirror. Join it back together. Use the Alt-M merge to delete those extra overlapping vertices. And then I'm going to bevel this edge, Control B, to make a seamless backdrop. I'm going to position the light so it's at a slight angle. And right now, if I hit 0, it won't do anything because I have no camera view, and so I can't render anything. Shift A, you can add a new camera. A camera is like a physical object. You can move it, you can rotate it. So I'm going to move this camera. Press 0 to go into the camera view, and you can actually move the camera inside the camera view. GZ, I'm going to pull that camera up. And I'm going to pull this camera back a little bit. GY. I think this is actually a little too bright now, a little too orange. I'm going to change that to a little more yellow. That's too yellow. And you can also add, in the shader editor, go to world. The background is just a gray color. Shift A, search for environment texture. And that color to color. Everything's pink now because that indicates a missing texture. You can open and then find your favorite HDRI image. And now you can see the reflection of the environment texture in the lampshade. And then you can render. And here's the final rendering. If you like this lamp, or even love this lamp.
I love lamp. I love lamp.
You can find in your preferences, under File Paths, the location of your asset library. Here I have it in Blender Assets. If I save this, this is my Blender Assets folder. I'm going to save lamp, and then in the outliner, if I right-click, select Mark as Asset, and then save. I can rename this lamp. Control S to save. If I open a new file, go to my asset browser, go to my user library. Here's my lamp that I just made. So I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of my workflow for a simple project like this lamp. I think it's a great example of how you can take a reference image and with some basic modeling techniques create a realistic and useful asset in Blender. If you made it this far, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. If you have any questions or requests, please feel free to drop them in the comments. This is actually my first YouTube video, so if you have any constructive feedback, I'd love to hear it. Was this too detailed or too long, or were the step-by-step tips and explanations helpful when shown across a full project workflow? I've used Blender both professionally and personally for years, and I'd love to be able to give back to the community by sharing what I've learned. So, hopefully others can experience the same kind of creative freedom that it's given me. If you'd like to see more Blender 3D content, tips and tricks, or full project breakdowns, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment. I'm looking forward to sharing more of my experience with you. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.